Welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast with me, Sam Harris, your host. I invite fascinating humans from all walks of life to share their wisdom and unpack their mindsets and formulas for growth. On the show today, we have another massive insight drop from Chris Howard, the founder of The Rattle and various other companies. And we're chatting all about why we do things and really picking the right reasons and not letting yourself be driven into making decisions just because that's what everyone else does and what society is telling you to do, and how to choose your own entrepreneurial journey that fits the lifestyle for you rather than just kind of what everyone else says you should do. And it's a really deep conversation that I found very fascinating and enjoyed a lot, and I'm sure you're going to learn from, because Chris is a bit of a knowledge bomb dropper and just a great storyteller. So again, enjoy the next 20 minutes worth of audio. And if you want to listen to the whole version of this podcast, it will be soon available on Syncify exclusively rather than just these shorts. And Chris is a legend. And again, also please join Syncify, because you'll be able to contact me and comment on any of these episodes and ask me more questions. Syncify being my social podcast app. Anyway, I think that's enough for the introduction, and let's get into the podcast. So yeah, when you then found what you went and did you suddenly feel like you were in the right place, or was it just random, this was the first thing that stuck? Do you think you could have found something completely different and it would have been quite just as satisfying?
The first time I felt like I was in the right place was a couple of months into being at MIT. And I actually really vividly remember the time I thought, oh, wow, I think I found what it is that I'm meant to do, at least for this next portion of my professional life. And I remember I was introduced to a mentor at MIT. People who are doing kind of postdoctoral research are often given mentors to try and think about what they want to do with the stuff that they research. And my mentor was a guy called Brian Halligan, who is the founder of HubSpot. I only met him not many times, but we would meet kind of every month or every other month, and it felt like at that point I was starting to be shaped into something. I didn't quite know what I was being shaped into, but it felt really good. And he made a connection to a guy who's fundamentally changed my life, and now I live and breathe a philosophy which this human imparted on me. I don't know if he meant to, but Brian Halligan sent me to this event at MIT called The Nuts and Bolts of Entrepreneurship. And I didn't really have much of an interest in entrepreneurship at that point. I didn't know that's something that I'd end up finding my people in. But I went to this talk because he wanted to meet one particular human afterwards. I went to this talk where there's 250 people in this audience. It's one talk amongst, I think, about a dozen throughout that week on this subject. And there's a panel of 4 people at the front. And the subject was how to get funding for your first idea or something like that. Now, it's a subject, you and I have probably heard 1,000 times now. But I had no idea why I was there other than for the free beer and pizza at the very end, because it's kind of why you do anything most of the time. Yeah. And I remember it was all about funding. I remember on the far left, there were 4 men, super old dudes, bit large, looked really bored, blue jeans, baseball cap, shirt. He just really looked like he didn't want to be there, slumped in his chair, an angel investor. And then there were 2 guys in the middle, kind of late 20s, early 30s, perfect chisel jaw, amazing big fat tie, creases you can measure with a protractor from a distance. And it's they were consultants, obviously, from Bain, talking about how Bain fund ideas. And then to the far right, there was a slightly older guy, looked very similar to the 2 in the middle. He had long wavy hair and no tie, slouching backwards, clearly a VC. And these 4, I remember somebody asking a question this is my medical device thing I've thought about. What do I do next? And I actually really remember this. Forgive me, I'm going to have to stand up because I need to get into character. But he's one of the consultants, he stands up, he goes like this. Are you ready, Sam? He goes, well, you need to follow Bain's 5-point funding plan. And he says this with the most conviction I've ever seen. And everyone in the room is about to take some notes. Oh, the 5-point funding plan from Bain. And he goes, step 1! And he puts his fingers together. And literally, as his fingers touch, throughout the auditorium, we suddenly hear, it's just vomit sound through the PA. And all of a sudden, this guy goes bright white, literally white. And he's stood there with his fingers connected together. But he's just suddenly paralyzed with fear. And he looks over to his right. And that old dude who said nothing, like literally nothing, throughout this entire period. He just suddenly goes, and stands up like this monster. He stands up and he points to this guy. He goes, "Boy, you're so fucking old school." And the whole room's like, what the fuck has just happened? And he stood there like the kind of consultant's there with his fingers connected together, looking up to this super tall, massive old dude with rage in his eyes. And he just sits down and just shuts up for the next like 20 minutes. And I was just like, what the fuck just happened? Like, what on earth? Can you imagine it? Like a panel, investors.
Sensible people. And you're like...
just like it came out of nowhere. That was the guy I was supposed to go meet. And so I kind of was like, oh, who is this human? I want to know who this guy is. So beauty of an MIT email address is you get a reply. So I emailed John Landry. He's the founder and CTO of Lotus, the big technology company. And was like, hey, John, I was at your talk. Well, shout. Can we meet? And he replies just one word. He just replies, yes. So I reply, now? That was one of the funniest emails. I wish I still had it. Anyway, I met John Landry 2 weeks later in Harvard Square. He brings me up into this office. It turned out to be General Catalyst, a big VC's office. I didn't know that at the time. Went to his office, and he kind of talks a bit like Boris Johnson, but with an American accent. He kind of goes, oh, come in, Chris. Yeah, come in. Sit down. And I sat down opposite him, and he goes, I haven't got long. What do you want? And I completely froze. I was like, I don't know. I just wanted to say hi. I wanted to know who you are. He does it again right in front of my face. He goes, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Then you can get out and you'll come and meet me again in 2 weeks. I was like, what? He goes, okay, Chris. Question 1. I was like, what the fuck is happening right now? Like, question 1. Is there a group of people you really care about that aren't being helped right now? And I start thinking about it. I start saying off the top of my head, oh, musicians, artists, authors, book writers, whatever, people who make stuff, like they're always blocked by gatekeepers somehow. He's like, good. Question 2. It's like, is there something you think you can do not many other people can do? Or something you know that not many other people know? And I rummage around my more recent experiences and go, don't claim to be the best in the world, but I'm pretty good at like condensing human behavior into a computer program. He goes, good. He says, question number 3. It's like, yes, John. It's like, are you prepared to work really hard? I swear he looked like Churchill the dog when he did it. Like, really hard. And manage, but never chase enormous risk. And I had no flipping clue what he meant, so my answer was, yep. He goes, get out! And like that conversation stuck with me for about 2 weeks. So I was like, oh my God, like who is this founder of this technology company I kind of knew about? He's credited with inventing the electronic spreadsheet. I kept talking to all my friends, like this guy, like he just asked me these questions and they're sticking in my mind. And I had my meeting with him 2 weeks later. I just kept talking about it, and I came back to John a few weeks later. I was like, okay, John, I know I've only got a few minutes, but I got an idea. I've been working on this thing, with Darren Brown's writer, and I want to see if I can use all this psychology stuff that I've been making, all this kind of, predicting how humans influence one another online around creative topics. See if I can use that knowledge to somehow help authors, people who write books. For some reason, I had an obsession at that point. People who write books not need a publisher. I wonder if I can use that tech to help with that problem. Don't quite know where to start. John, what do I do? And no word of a lie, genuinely, he pulls out a piece of paper and he writes down a number, $25,000. And he gave me that piece of paper and he said, okay, Chris, if you quit MIT and you use that knowledge to fix that problem, this check will be yours. And I was like, what? So John Landry became my very first investor in my very first company. He and one other guy called Bill Warner both wrote $25,000 each, simply on the premise I would use that skill to solve that problem. And they both came on as advisors and our first investors. And the rest is kind of history, really. And that mantra, that whole, are you making something for someone that needs something important to them in some meaningful way? And can you do something unique and different? Whether or not they're connected doesn't matter. Like that mantra of identifying those two core things and then characteristics of a founder has led me to where I am today, and it's the thing I'm obsessed with. So that's the moment I found what I wanted to do. Sorry for the long story. I didn't intend to tell that story, but I just did.
It was great. I really enjoyed it. As in, it's definitely what I'm generally seeking in podcasts, is like really good stories or like how-tos. It's just what people like. So I'm going to remember that also.
Yeah, it sticks with me. It's so vivid in my brain. It just made me think about how to make decisions slightly differently. And it's become a foundation principle now of how I help others. Is I've evolved it a bit, but when I want to help somebody think like a founder, the very first thing I do is, okay, tell me who you give a shit about. What's wrong there with those people right now? Doesn't need to be huge, doesn't need to be altruistic. It can be something as grand as solving world hunger. Doesn't matter. Or something as small and innocuous as, I really want people who love blue jeans to enjoy red jeans. It just doesn't matter. What matters is that there's a group of people that have a challenge and you care enough about it. That's the thing that matters. And it's the very first thing I try and help people identify.
Yeah, that's really useful. Like the 3 questions were kind of, you're just like, oh yeah, this is really simple. Why do we overthink all these things?
It's mind-numbingly painful. Like when some accelerator programs, like we know what accelerator programs are, helping small startups accelerate into a brick wall of nothing. But to accelerate, their business growth, the kind of the guidance that they're often given is, you need to sell. Prepare your pitch to be on stage and ask stupid investors to write stupid checks for you. And then 6 months later, you spend it all and go, shit, I need to raise some more money. It's this kind of cult of fundraising for fundraising's sake has destroyed the thing that makes startups really great, which is make something original that people give a shit about, that embraces what you are uniquely good at. And then scale is just a matter of ambition and where you point it. It's got nothing really to do with kind of your original intentions. And it's fascinating to me how overcomplicated these things are now getting and how much of a performance it now seems to be to build a company. Like, go back a little while, you used to have to make good shit. Now, you need to present and speak a certain way, like fluidly in front of a big presentation, in front of 500 people, which then gets streamed online, and you have to dance these stupid dances around begging people for money. It's just absolute nonsense. It's complete nonsense, and it really annoys me. Yes, I just touched my own button there. I had to stop myself.
Yes, I see. I kind of agree.
This is me selling pieces of myself as time goes by with no obvious piece of support and return.
And just sort of like just wanting to be honest about where you're at exactly, but then people sort of, as in, because it's kind of like an evolution sort of fit this kind of scenario where like everyone's sort of fudging their like data or something to make it sound like they're doing more things than they are, or like you have to like tell people about all your traction or like not quite show it correctly to make it seem amazing. When you're like, well, it's a kind of an idea and we built like an MVP and we're kind of just getting there, but like product market fit is obviously, this is what the money is for. Like, but you had to sort of say that you have the thing that you're aiming to build ahead of time, otherwise people won't talk to you, even though like they're not actually ever going to be able to fund anyone at the level that they want at like first early stage.
If there's one thing, like people compare the UK and the US quite a lot. They will say, oh, British, you're too reserved, or you don't think like the Valley does. I don't think that's true. But I do think what happens is that there's not necessarily enough investors or people who back projects in the UK who have built projects of their own, necessarily speaking. And I'm not criticizing anybody for that, but it's more when you have a history of making money from a very long career in a stable-ish job in one company, which you didn't found or get off the ground, and then you go and support and invest in young startups, it's the kind of the things that you believe you need to see in that founder don't really relate to the founder's journey because you don't relate to the founder's journey. Whereas in the US, many of them are repeat founders, so they do empathize with the beginning. But what you're saying about product market fit is one of my kind of pet peeves at the moment, and it's this concept of when you're thinking of building a company and you know investment's a way that you're going to have to grow or you want to grow, it's a choice most of the time. This burden of having to prove you're somehow a great business before you've begun is just a joke. It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah, that was just a super useful framework of thinking, and certainly added a lot of clarity to where I'm at. And there is still some questions of now of like, okay, do we just not bother and like maybe just get a loan for like the next few months and then just come back in 2 months' time? Because currently what we're kind of doing is like, okay, raising the SEIS round, which is more for people at the like founder fit stage, and for like angels that maybe aren't going to ask so many questions, whilst just starting off some of the conversations with VCs, ready to then do like the actual seed round later. But yeah, it depends on how much you want to raise as well, I guess, because if we're kind of like, okay, 500,000 sort of pre-seed, ready to like do like a proper seed round at the end of the year, like next year.
These questions of how much to raise, who from, all of those things are kind of, they're almost meaningless questions until you, with respect, sorry, I just realised that might come across really rude. They're like almost meaningless questions if you haven't decided what your end game looks like. Okay, and let me give you an example, because you can say, okay, yeah, I need 500,000 now. I'll sell 18 to 20% of the company. Then I'm going to do my Series A, 2 to 5 mil. I'll sell another 18 to 20%. And then I'll do I'll end at a Series B, getting between 5 and 10 mil. You'll get to that point and go, I've got another 5 fundraisers in me, because actually what I want is $1 billion company. But you realise you've sold all of your equity and you haven't raised enough money. Or the opposite can be absolutely true. You get to like the product market fit and go, actually, I really quite like this. I don't want 20,000 people. Who wants that? I don't want to hire MBAs. I'd like to keep this quite small and intimate, and we all do incredibly well, thank you very much. And all of those end games define the strategy for raising money. It's not like, oh, this is what everyone else does, therefore I must do it. It's absolute bullshit. Like, first of all, you do what I call a sandbox, which is what John Landry asked me. He was, who are you setting out to ultimately address a problem with, and what behavior are you going to create, basically, is what he asked. So you start with a sandbox to filter your decision-making to say, will it meaningfully impact that? If it doesn't meaningfully impact that, don't do it, and that includes raising money. Then the next set of questions is, as an owner, what does success look like? What does my equity success look like? If you're a venture founder, equity success is, I want to sell this equity and live off the proceeds as a result of that. Or you can be what I call an equity company, and I know I've used that word quite a lot. You can be an equity company where you say, actually, I want to own this thing for as long as possible, and the profit it generates will pay me my stipend, my dividends, whatever it may be. So, shock horror, venture capital invests in venture companies. Shock horror, private equity invests in equity companies. Like, who'd have thought it? So if you're building a venture company, you're trying to be not the most commercially viable, but the most valuable of your kind. Whereas private equity or equity companies, you're trying to be the most profitable of your kind. And so you raise money in accordance to those two things, the sandbox, the who and why, and your end game for the equity itself. And if you haven't got an end game identified, it's a very dangerous thing to take money when you don't have an end game identified, because you're going to misalign your intentions with somebody who's a venture investor saying, I expect you to sell in 5 to 7 years because that's why I gave you the money, versus an equity investor that says, let's slow burn this thing. Let's just focus on a great business model. We'll take money when and if we need it. But, in time, I want you to make a profitable business, and we'll just sit here in our hammocks and enjoy the checks that come flying in. You need to align your interests. It's one of the biggest failings of every startup is they don't align their owner's interests. It's painful to watch.
But how do you know necessarily what you want? As in, how many people have become rock stars to find out they didn't want to be one or something? And sort of, if you're starting a business, you're like, okay, you want to do all these things, and then halfway through, you're like, actually, I wouldn't mind sort of slowing down the gas and thinking this differently, or maybe the other way around, actually I have to run this for the next 20 years and it just makes money, but maybe I just want to sell it, but I can't because of it.
This is now highly controversial. My personal opinion is, if you don't know what you want at the end, don't start a fucking company. It's madness. It's not education. I think it's utterly irresponsible, in fact, because to you, you're like, oh yeah. And I used to use this line, by the way. I used to subscribe to what I now hate, which is, oh, if it fails, it's an MBA and, it's basically getting an MBA on the job, isn't it? And, oh, if it fails, never mind. Like, you say that when you watch 39 people get made redundant as a result of you treating it like an MBA. Or you start realizing all of these suppliers and customers which have now depended on the thing that you have made, and then their livelihoods are ruined as a result of your unwillingness to set a fucking direction. It's utterly irresponsible to go raise money, at least, if you are not fixed in your destination. That doesn't mean it can't change. It really doesn't. It's okay to change. But what matters is if you don't know and your get out, which I hear all the time, is, well, it's just a great experience, isn't it? If it doesn't work. I literally want to kick those people in the gut and say, go back to fucking school then. Like, it's just, this is not a personal education's charity. You are putting people's livelihoods in the firing line of your education, which is just not on. Anyway, sorry. A little bit of a ramble there.
Yeah, that was nice. I do like some strong opinions. I mean, what about the other issue of, like, what if you just can't be doing other things? If you just an entrepreneur that you can't, like, work for other people as such, or if you're unable to find, like, a different calling that suits you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, everything I'm saying is just my opinion, by the way. I just want to caveat that. I'm speaking specifically around the concept of a founder versus an entrepreneur. And there is a subtlety in my mind. An entrepreneur is somebody who will turn a commercial problem into a job. They will say, I'm an entrepreneur because I see these commercial problems and I solve them for money. Sometimes that's as small as a freelancer. Yeah. Sometimes it's making a product, right? So products are things that solve commercial problems. Inventions are things that change behavior. A founder is somebody that wants to create both inventions and products and a business and to lead something to some conclusion. I have founded a movement. I have founded a startup. I've founded a company for the purposes of XYZ. Entrepreneurship, absolutely fine. If you cannot work with others, at least not in a subordinate way, then cool, good for you. You know how you operate. And there are organizations that embrace entrepreneurs as team members as opposed to founders. But being a founder, that is a responsibility that too many people don't take seriously. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes lots of sense. And when you first said founder versus entrepreneur, huge difference, I was like, what? And then you said that, and like, okay, totally get it. I've always been an entrepreneur and always wanted to be a founder. And I've had one business where I say, like, I would actually like a founder. The rest of them have been more entrepreneurial things.
Yeah.
And then now this one is definitely being a founder again. And I guess one of the things I struggle with around, like, the venture sale versus equity live off is I feel kind of wrong saying that I want it to be a venture sale, because, like, I do really believe in the mission and what we're doing. And, like, I don't hate the idea of doing it for a long time, but it is my intention more on the venture sale, because there's other things that I do want to do, but you're not supposed to talk about the other things that you want to do or how it goes into that. And then it's just, like, so annoying.
Oh, man, you are pushing all my buttons today. This is excellent. You should not be embarrassed about the fact that you don't want to be doing this for the rest of your life. Oh, man, it's like picking the number of kids you're going to want, or where you're going to live forever, or, like, who your one and only friend's going to be forever. It's absolute bullshit. We are humans, right? Founders are humans. They have wants and needs in the outside world, which is far bigger, far more complex, and far less under your control than anyone gives you credit for. So yeah, like, this, venture companies are almost the norm, whether people intend to make it or not, in the fundraising world at least. Because the second you take money from somebody who is a venture investor, there's a stopwatch has been started on the day that they expect something back. But you don't want to have a career as a founder. Doesn't mean you want a career in one business, even though you may have made it. And just because the business gets sold doesn't mean the business dies. To say you give a shit about this thing at this point in your career as a founder, and then saying, I might care about other things in future, is a real compliment to you. It's a real credit. It says that you won't, like, stop at the first victory or the first defeat. And that's a really great thing. But also, for you to be worried, that somehow gives a signal you're not committed. I mean, if anybody reacts like you not being committed, where their only risk profile is writing a signature on a check for money they can afford to lose and forget about the next day, tell them to go fuck themselves.
Congratulations on listening to a whole episode of the Growth Mindset podcast. Before you race into another podcast, try pausing. Ask yourself, what have you learned? What could you change? How will you make that change happen? Did you press pause? Knowledge is useless without action. What did you learn? What should you change? And how will you make that change happen? You can tell us what you learned by contacting us through the website growthmindsetpodcast.com, and feel free to connect with us or our guests, or just peruse the show notes. Our Instagram is @growthmindsetpodcast, or follow me @SamJamSnaps for a daily reminder to stop using Instagram. If you enjoy random acts of kindness and want to support the show, you can support us on Patreon or leave us a review on iTunes, and you'll make me very happy. And with that, keep learning and keep growing.